Welcome, dear listener. As the world quiets and night falls, let your mind drift into peaceful slumber. Tonight, we journey with Lyra into the mysterious forest of whispering leaves, where ancient trees share their secrets through soft whispers. Close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let the gentle rhythm of the story guide you into a world of wonder and tranquility. Let the adventure begin. In the land of Anthera, beneath skies heavy with dusk, there lies a forest shrouded in mist and mystery. Some call it a sanctuary, others a trap, but all know it by one name: the Forest of Whispering Leaves. Ancient, watchful, the trees stand silent and proud, hiding secrets in every knotted root, every twist of branch. They do not simply live. They breathe, pulse, and whisper, sharing their wisdom with any who might listen. Yet so few dare. Stories drift through village hearths and travel-worn inns, each one telling of wanderers drawn into the forest's depths, never to return. It is said that the forest chooses whom it calls, and that those chosen must tread with humility and intent, lest the forest itself turn against them. The whispering leaves murmur warnings to those willing to listen. Seek only if you are ready, for the forest does not suffer the unwise. And so most let the whispers fade, content to remain outside the forest's reach. But not Lyra, Lyra of the bright eyes and restless soul. She heard the call. Since her youth, Lyra felt the subtle pull of the unknown, the tantalizing lure of the hidden and the unseen. And one evening, as the sun dipped beneath the hills and night unfurled her cloak, Lyra felt a new sense of purpose rise within her. She would venture into the forest of whispering leaves, to unravel the mystery that had eluded so many before her. Carrying only a small lantern, Lyra approached the forest's edge. The trees loomed ahead, their silhouettes outlined by the waning light, their leaves stirring as if to greet her. But Lyra sensed that these were no ordinary trees. Shadows moved among their branches with an almost watchful patience, and the very air around them seemed to tremble with secrets unsaid. As she stepped beneath the canopy, the forest seemed to come alive. The rustling leaves formed soft whispers, delicate as a sigh, yet rich with meaning. It was not merely sound, it was communication, a language as old as the earth. Lyra could feel it, an energy pulsing through each leaf, each root, each shadowed bough. Who seeks the heart of the forest? The whispers seemed to ask, mingling with the soft crunch of her footsteps on the leaf-strewn ground. Lyra hesitated, surprised by the power of the question resonating within her. It wasn't merely her name that the forest wanted. It was her intent, her truest self. "I am Lyra," she whispered back, her voice fragile against the vastness of the forest's gaze. "I come to listen, to learn." Her words faded into the evening air, absorbed by the forest itself. as if the trees understood. And then, as if in answer, a faint shimmer appeared further down the path, a light, soft and silvery, drifting between the trees. Lyra squinted, her curiosity growing as the light beckoned her deeper. She felt both welcomed and warned, an unspoken invitation that was also a test. To go forward meant entering a place where the ordinary rules of the world no longer applied, where each step she took would be one of discovery and of risk. She moved forward, the forest tightening its hold around her, the mist thickening into a shroud. The whispers grew louder now, clearer, taking on an almost musical quality, as though the trees were singing to her. They spoke in riddles, fragments of an ancient tale she could barely understand. Listen to the silence, for it speaks the truth, murmured the voice of the oaks. Trust in what you cannot see, sighed the whispers of the willows. The words lingered, blending into the rhythm of her heartbeat. Lyra felt a shiver crawl along her skin, an awareness that something else was watching. The forest was vast and alive with unseen eyes, creatures, shadows, beings older than any mortal could imagine. She realized that in stepping beyond the edge, she had entered a realm where time itself felt fluid, a place both part of and beyond the world she knew. A soft rustle beside her, and then silence. Lyra turned, holding her breath, but saw nothing beyond the wavering shadows. The whispers resumed, urging her onward, as though testing her courage. She continued, her steps quieter now, her heart attuned to the forest's rhythm. In the distance, she could hear something new, a different kind of sound, a melody so faint she almost doubted it. But as she listened, it grew clearer, a soft song woven from voices not human, nor entirely of this world. It was the song of the forest itself, a melody as old as the roots buried deep in the earth. Lyra closed her eyes, surrendering to the whispers that wrapped around her like a gentle wind, guiding her to a place known only to the chosen. In the deepening shadows, Lyra followed the silvery light as it flickered between trees, elusive as a memory. The path was narrow, twisting through clusters of ancient oaks and vines that glistened with dew, even though night had barely begun. Each step she took seemed to echo, though there was no sound, only the soft whispers, murmuring a strange, melodic language she could barely understand. Suddenly, the light paused, hovering just ahead of her, and Lyra froze. The air shifted, growing thick and warm as if she'd stepped through an invisible veil. And there, in a grove bathed in the soft, otherworldly glow, she saw them, the elves of Shimmerwood. They were creatures of light and shadow, their skin gleaming with a faint silver sheen, their hair blending seamlessly with the mist. Their eyes glowed with an ancient, ageless knowing, reflecting the stories of 1,000 stars. They stood in a half circle, as if waiting, as if they'd known all along she would come. Each elf was tall and slender, with an elegance that seemed woven into their very bones. Their leader stepped forward. He was taller than the others, his eyes as dark as the depths of an undisturbed lake, gleaming with a soft fire. His name, Lyra somehow knew, was Eldarin. She felt it in the way he moved, the way the leaves seemed to part in reverence for his presence. His voice, when he spoke, was low and soft, like the brush of wind through leaves. "Welcome, Lyra," he said, his words a whisper that seemed to come from the forest itself. "You have entered the heart of Shimmerwood, where few dare tread. Tell me, what is it you seek?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze drawn to his as though compelled by some unseen force. "I seek understanding," she replied, her voice barely above a murmur. She wasn't sure if her answer was enough, but it was the only truth she knew in that moment. Eldarin tilted his head, his expression unreadable, though his eyes softened, hinting at a distant amusement. "Understanding," he echoed. "Such a small word, and yet it is a journey all its own." He gestured, and in unison the elves drew closer, forming a circle around her, their eyes intent. Lyra felt a chill, a warmth of curiosity and caution mingled together. She was an outsider here, in a place where time held no sway, and the world felt different, shimmering just out of reach. And yet they did not seem hostile. There was only an expectation, as though her presence alone had stirred something long dormant within them. Eldarin raised a hand, and the whispering leaves grew silent, the forest holding its breath. "The forest of whispering leaves is no mere woodland," he said, his voice filling the silence. "It is a place of wisdom, older than any tale you have heard. Here, each leaf, each root, each shadow speaks, revealing paths unseen and knowledge long forgotten. But only those who listen with open hearts may hear its truths." The other elves nodded, their faces solemn. Lyra felt their eyes upon her, assessing, as if her very soul lay bare before them. Eldarin continued, his gaze piercing. "If you wish to pass through Shimmerwood, you must do more than look. You must listen. The trees and creatures of this forest do not speak with voices as you know them. Their wisdom is woven into whispers, hidden between breaths, revealed in silence. Only those who open themselves fully, who trust in the forest's guidance, may find the path to safety." He stepped closer, his eyes capturing hers with an intensity that held both warning and welcome. "Many have come before you, seeking answers, treasures, fame, yet most are lost, drawn astray by what they think they hear. The forest listens to those who listen truly." Lyra nodded, understanding more than she could put into words. She could feel the forest around her, an unseen presence that watched, waited, with a patience older than stars. She knew now that this place was alive in ways she could barely grasp, a realm of wisdom that stretched beyond her senses. Eldarin lifted his hand again, and one of the other elves stepped forward, her hair flowing like silvered mist. She held a small pendant, a delicate twist of vine and leaf, humming with a faint glow. She placed it around Lyra's neck, her touch light as a whisper. "This will guide you," she said softly, her voice like a distant song. "It will attune you to the forest's heart. Listen well, Lyra, and trust what you feel, even if it leads you where sight cannot follow." With a nod from Eldorin, the elves stepped back, dissolving into the shadows, their forms melting into the mist, until only the glimmer of their eyes remained, watching from the dark. Lyra clutched the pendant, feeling its soft pulse, a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. She felt the forest's gaze upon her, expectant, waiting. Eldorin's final words echoed in her mind. "In the forest of whispering leaves, the ears lead where the eyes deceive." She turned, the path before her now faint but present, stretching into the depths of Shimmerwood. And as she took her first step forward, the leaves resumed their murmuring, 1,000 voices whispering, guiding, challenging her to listen. The forest grew denser as Lyra ventured deeper, her steps guided by the subtle pulse of the pendant at her neck. Around her, the air thickened with mist, dimming her sight and blurring the edges of reality, as though she had crossed into a realm made of secrets. The leaves overhead seemed to close in, weaving a canopy of twilight that only barely let the stars glimmer through. But the whispers grew louder, clearer, as if the trees themselves leaned closer, eager to share their knowledge. She entered the veil of echoing shadows. Here, each step she took seemed to double, echoes rippling through the silence like stones dropped in still water. The forest was alive with murmurs, not in words, but in sounds so faint and layered that it felt like listening to the breath of the earth itself. The echoing whispers seemed to come from everywhere at once, 1,000 voices murmuring from every leaf, every branch, every creature hiding in the shadows. There was wisdom here. She felt it, hidden in fragments, in pieces she had to gather with patience and care. For the first time, Lyra understood what the elves had meant. She had to listen, not only with her ears, but with her spirit, her intuition, trusting that each sound held a hidden truth, waiting for her to find it. As she stepped forward, the sound shifted, the whispers forming into subtle phrases that twisted and turned in her mind, urging her onward, yet warning her to tread carefully. She heard the faint hiss of snakes, low and cautious, slithering through the leaves, their voices merging into one. To rush is to lose. Move slowly or be swallowed by the shadows. Lyra paused, breathing deeply, feeling her heart steady itself to match the rhythm of the forest. She closed her eyes, relying on the pulse of the pendant, which seemed to guide her with a quiet insistence. a gentle tug that she could only sense when her mind was truly calm. Around her, the whispers wove a delicate tapestry of guidance and misdirection, as though the forest itself was testing her resolve, challenging her to discern the true path from illusions. The air grew colder, and she felt the presence of creatures lurking just beyond her vision, watchful, waiting, eyes gleaming faintly in the dark. Every now and then, a distant laugh echoed through the trees, fleeting and ghostly, only to vanish like smoke. She sensed something else in the shadows, something that sought to pull her off her path. She moved slowly, listening as each plant and creature seemed to offer its own advice, its own warning. A tangle of ivy whispered as she passed, a subtle voice curling around her like tendrils. Beware the shining paths. They are not as they seem. Lyra nodded, taking this to heart, her gaze cautious as she looked down, watching for glimmers of light beneath the mist. She knew now that the forest would offer both guidance and deception, testing her willingness to heed its warnings. Then came a sound, a distant, melodic chiming, so soft it might have been mistaken for the call of a night bird. But Lyra paused, her intuition tugging at her. She followed the sound, and as she moved, it grew louder, more insistent, until she came to a clearing where strange flowers bloomed, their petals iridescent in the faint starlight. They whispered to her, voices blending in a harmony of caution and promise. Only those who seek with pure hearts may pass through the veil. She knelt by the flowers, watching as their petals trembled, leaning toward her as though speaking directly to her spirit. And there, in that quiet moment, she felt the weight of her journey settle upon her. She was not merely a wanderer, an adventurer in search of mystery. She was a seeker, one who had come to learn, to grow. The forest knew this, and it seemed to honor her purpose. But just as she began to rise, she saw it. A path, shimmering faintly in the mist, leading deeper into the forest. It was bathed in an alluring glow, as though promising her safety, offering an easy way out. The whispers of the ivy echoed in her memory. Beware the shining paths. Lyra hesitated, her heart quickening. She knew somehow that this was a test. The real path was not the one illuminated, not the one that seemed obvious. She stepped away from the light, feeling the faint pulse of the pendant once more, reassuring her, guiding her back into the shadows, where the true way lay hidden. With every step, the whispers grew softer, as though pleased, as though acknowledging her choice. She understood now that the forest was both teacher and guardian, a place that challenged those who entered to prove their sincerity, their willingness to learn without demanding. As she left the veil of echoing shadows, the forest seemed to release its hold on her, allowing her passage to the next unknown realm. She felt lighter, her senses sharper, her mind clearer. She had passed through shadows and whispers, trusting her heart to guide her. And she felt now as though the forest had accepted her, if only for a little while longer. The path stretched ahead, disappearing into deeper darkness, and she followed without fear, her spirit attuned to the forest's quiet wisdom. The shadows deepened as Lyra continued along the winding trail, the light from her lantern barely illuminating the path ahead. It felt as though the forest was pulling her inward, drawing her toward its beating heart. The mist curled around her ankles, silent and watchful, as if listening to each careful footfall. The whispers faded to a murmur, softer now, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Then, as she rounded a bend, Lyra found herself at the mouth of a narrow path, overgrown with thick vines and shadowed by towering trees. There was no mistaking it. This was the path of listening, the route that Eldarin had spoken of in hushed reverence, the path that required more than eyes or feet to navigate. Here, sound alone was not enough. It was feeling, a tuning into the deeper resonance of the forest. A peculiar silence settled around her. The usual hum of whispers had dimmed, leaving only a faint, rhythmic pulse, like the slow, steady beat of a giant heart buried deep within the earth. It was a silence that wasn't empty but full, heavy with expectation, as though the entire forest was waiting for her to understand something unspoken. Lyra took a slow, deliberate breath, letting herself sink into the quiet. She had to listen not with her ears, but with something deeper, something within her that knew the language of silence. She let her heart open, feeling the pulse of the forest as it aligned with her own. The first few steps felt tentative, uncertain. The path was dark, twisting in unpredictable ways, and she quickly realized that her eyes were of little use here. Each time she tried to look ahead, the darkness seemed to deepen, swallowing up the faint edges of the path until she could no longer discern the way. She closed her eyes, trusting her senses instead, letting the quiet rhythm of the forest guide her forward. As she moved, she felt the faint tug of the pendant, its pulse matching the forest's beat, urging her in subtle directions. She followed the feeling, sensing when to veer left, when to step carefully, when to pause. The path shifted beneath her, not in the physical sense, but in a way that felt like the very ground was moving, aligning itself with her intentions, testing her trust. Then, a soft whisper brushed her mind, faint and distant, as if carried from the depths of the earth itself. To listen is to trust. To trust is to surrender. The words echoed, resonating through her bones, and Lyra knew then that this was a place where control held no power. She had to surrender fully, giving herself over to the forest's wisdom, allowing it to guide her without question. As she walked, visions began to flicker at the edges of her awareness. She saw faint figures, remnants of travelers who had come before, some lingering like memories etched into the fabric of the forest. She could feel their stories, their struggles, and their longing, all woven into the roots beneath her feet. Some were filled with regret, others with acceptance, but all had left their mark on the path, each whispering a silent warning to those who followed. One vision lingered, a young man with wide eyes, lost in desperation, calling out to the forest with fear in his voice. He'd tried to take the path by force, seeking answers with greed and haste, unwilling to trust the quiet guidance. Lyra felt his fear like a shadow across her mind, and in that moment, she understood the depth of the forest's demand. Only those who could surrender, who could let go of their own will and listen, truly listen, would be allowed passage. The pulse of the pendant grew stronger, and Lyra felt her own heart soften, releasing any final trace of resistance. She let herself be drawn forward, a quiet surrender to the wisdom that surrounded her. The path shifted, feeling more solid beneath her feet, as though she had proven herself to the forest's ancient spirit. Finally, the darkness began to thin, and she sensed a change in the air, a warmth, a softness, as if dawn was brushing against the edge of night. She opened her eyes, and before her lay a small clearing bathed in the faint, silvery light of early morning. The path behind her seemed to vanish into the mist, and she felt as though she had stepped into a different realm altogether. Eldarin stood at the clearing's edge, his gaze thoughtful and knowing. His eyes held a quiet pride, a silent acknowledgement of what she had faced. "You have walked the path of listening," he said, his voice a soft resonance in the stillness. "And in doing so, you have earned the forest's trust." Lyra met his gaze, a strange feeling of peace settling over her. She realized that this journey was more than just a passage through the forest. It was a journey into herself, into a place where silence held more truth than words ever could. "Thank you," she whispered, though she wasn't certain who the words were for. Eldarin, the forest, or herself. Eldarin nodded, his expression calm and wise. "The path of listening does not end here, Lyra," he murmured. "It is one you carry with you, long after you leave the forest. Remember its wisdom, for it will guide you in ways unseen." With that, he turned, his figure fading back into the forest, leaving her alone in the clearing as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. And as she looked back at the path she'd walked, she knew she would carry its echoes with her always. The wisdom of the silent path, the quiet surrender to truth that only listening could reveal. The first light of dawn cast a soft golden glow over the clearing, illuminating the dew-laden leaves and the mist that clung to the forest floor. Lyra stood alone, feeling the weight of her journey settle within her, a quiet presence that pulsed like the heart of the forest itself. She had come seeking understanding, but she knew now that what she had found was something far deeper, a bond with the forest, a place where silence spoke louder than words. Eldarin and the other elves were nowhere to be seen, yet their presence lingered, woven into the fabric of the morning mist. Lyra took a breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs, grounding her in this sacred moment. She had passed the tests, faced the forest's mysteries, and emerged on the other side not as a conqueror, but as one who had listened, one who had trusted. As she prepared to leave, the forest around her stirred, and a faint melody began to rise. It was soft at first, like a breeze through branches, but it grew, swelling with a haunting beauty that resonated through her bones. Lyra stood still, listening, as the forest unveiled its final gift to her, the silent song of home. The song was like nothing she had ever heard, a melody woven from whispers, from echoes of ancient voices and the sigh of wind through leaves. It was the song of every tree, every root, every shadowed glen she had walked through. It was a song of belonging, a reminder that she was now part of this place, forever bound by the journey she had taken. The song seemed to speak directly to her heart, telling her that home was not a place, but a feeling, a connection that stretched beyond time and place. It was a memory carried in the soul, a reminder of the journey and the truths learned along the way. Lyra felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from a profound sense of gratitude. She realized that the wisdom of the forest, the silent teachings of Shimmerwood, would guide her long after she left its boundaries. And as the song continued, she felt herself enveloped in a deep, unshakable calm, a peace that felt like standing at the center of a vast, endless ocean. She understood now that she had been chosen not only to walk through the forest, but to carry its whispers beyond these ancient trees. She would be a keeper of its song, one who could hear the wisdom in silence, who could feel the pulse of life in every leaf, every stone. The pendant at her neck pulsed gently, as if echoing the forest song, and Lyra touched it, feeling the cool, familiar weight against her skin. It had been her guide, her tether through the unknown, and now it felt like a piece of Shimmerwood itself, a fragment of the forest spirit she could carry with her always. As the last notes of the silent song faded into the stillness, Lyra felt a shift, a gentle release, as though the forest was giving her permission to go. She took one final look around, memorizing the curve of the trees, the faint glimmer of dew on the leaves, the way the light filtered through the mist. And then, with a quiet nod of gratitude, she turned and began the path back. The journey back through the forest was different from her arrival. The trees no longer loomed with mystery, but instead felt like familiar sentries, watching over her with a quiet understanding. The whispers were softer now, no longer testing but affirming, as though the forest itself acknowledged her as one of its own. She moved with a lightness in her step, each stride carrying her closer to the edge of Shimmerwood, each breath filling her with the song she would now carry forever. At last, she stepped beyond the forest boundary, out into the open fields where dawn had fully broken, casting its golden light over the land of Anthera. She turned back, her gaze lingering on the shadowed entrance of the forest of whispering leaves. Though she had emerged from its depths, she felt as though a part of her remained within, woven into the roots, leaves, and silent spaces. In the distance, she thought she caught a glimpse of Eldarin, his figure just barely visible between the trees, his eyes gleaming with quiet pride. And then he was gone, a mere shadow blending into the forest as if he had never been there. But Lyra knew he was watching, and that the forest would always be watching, guiding her even from afar. She took a deep breath, feeling the air of the open land fill her lungs, fresh and free. But within her, she still felt the pulse of Shimmerwood, the quiet wisdom that had transformed her, shaping her spirit in ways she could scarcely describe. She had come seeking answers, and in the end, she had found something even greater, a home within herself, a place of silence and truth she could carry wherever she went. With one last glance at the trees, Lyra turned and began her journey anew, stepping into the light of the morning. The silent song of home lingered in her heart, a melody that would forever guide her steps, reminding her that the true path was not one of sight, but of listening, of trusting the quiet truths that only the heart could hear. And so she walked forward, her spirit forever bound to the forest song, carrying with her the whispers of the leaves and the ancient wisdom of Shimmerwood, her journey only just beginning.